Throughout our discussion of Macbeth, we've seen that questions of what is real and what is illusory have been kept open. What exactly is the nature of the witches? Is the dagger really there? Is the ghost of Banquo really there? What's the relationship between the mental lives of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and the physical reality of the world around them? These are questions for debate. They're left open. But what is not in doubt is that the play is profoundly concerned with questions of good and evil. There is no doubt that Duncan has been a good king, and there is no doubt that Macbeth is an evil tyrant. That's seen above all in the extraordinarily painful scene where we witness the murder of Lady Macduff and her children. No Shakespeare play has a deeper interest in evil than Macbeth. And of course, many superstitions have surrounded the play, perhaps for that reason. The old theatrical superstition is that you mustn't even give the name of the play. Given that King James believed so passionately that the king was God's representative on earth, believed in the divine right of kings, the divine power of kings, as we saw with the idea of the touch against the king's evil, it's not surprising that the play has these preoccupations. But what is truly extraordinary about the drama is how Shakespeare simultaneously makes the play seem very, very real. The characters are psychologically extraordinarily interesting, and yet at the same time it takes on an almost cosmic significance. For instance, on the night of Duncan's murder, we hear that all sorts of strange things are happening. There's a scene where Ross, one of the other Scottish lords, and an old man discuss how Duncan's horses go wild and how the order of nature seems to be upset as a small bird eats a larger bird. Everything is being brought into a state of disruption, of chaos. And then, immediately after the murder itself, we have the extraordinary scene with the porter. There is a loud knocking on the gate, and a drunken porter comes to answer at the gate of the castle. Here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should get old turning the key. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there in the name of Beelzebub? Here's a farmer that hanged himself in the expectation of plenty. Come in time, have napkins enough about you. Here you'll sweat for it. It's a moment of extraordinary comic release after the horrendous scene of the murder, to have a drunken clown coming on, doing a whole series of knock, knock, who's there jokes. But as always, with the role of the clown and the role of comedy within Shakespearean tragedy, there's a deeper meaning to the comic gags. Because what the porter does is imagine Macbeth's castle as being like hell. He compares himself to the porter of Hell Gate. Who's there, not in the name of God, as one would normally say, but in the name of Beelzebub, one of the devils. And the idea then that a farmer is brought to the gate of hell, and the porter says, you're going to need napkins here, you're going to be sweating because of the fires of hell. I think there's really only one other play in Elizabethan England that is so vivid in its realization of the world of hell, the infernal world. And that is Christopher Marlowe's tragical history of the life and death of Dr. Faustus. I've got a facsimile here of the title page of the 1616 edition of it, where we see the figure of Faustus, the conjurer, with his magician's staff and his book of spells, standing in a circle. And of course the witches in Macbeth had that circle, the traditional magic circle. And then we have a figure of a devil coming up through the floor as Faustus communicates. There's no doubt that in Shakespeare's youth, Marlowe was the most celebrated, most innovative figure in the theatre world. And from Dr. Faustus, Shakespeare learnt the possibility of writing a drama about the psychology of ambition leading a man who potentially could do great things to do terrible things and to give himself over to the forces of evil. At the centre of Dr. Faustus are a great series of dialogues between Faustus and Mephistopheles, the evil spirit. And that was definitely an inspiration for Shakespeare as he began to write Macbeth and to think about how he could conjure up the world of evil. But the genius and the psychological sophistication of Macbeth comes in the way that there isn't an actual devil, there isn't the character called Mephistopheles or Beelzebub on stage, but rather Macbeth confronts evil internally. There is a battle inside him. It's as if where Faustus literally has a good angel at one moment appearing to him and telling him to do good, and a bad angel at the next moment tempting him to do ill. Macbeth, in his soliloquies, when he talks to himself, is talking to his own good and bad angels. This is a play where ultimately Shakespeare is suggesting that evil is something that comes not from a supernatural world, but from inside human behaviour. Like all Shakespeare's plays, but perhaps to a more sinister and profound extent than any of them, Macbeth is standing on the threshold between an old world of superstition, a belief in witches, a belief that hell is a real physical place, and a modern world in which the conditions of good and evil, the choices that make us human, are internal, are psychological. Macbeth is the great psychological thriller of the Jacobean age.